A birthday message from Jesus and me continued. It's originally from the Fire Gospel, but it's also in Towards a Radical Reformation of Christianity by Avatar Adidas Samraj. Your growth toward maturity will be limited only by the force of your application to the way of the spiritual reality once you become converted to it. This is the great discovery to be made on the basis of hearing my argument and giving me your attention or living in my company. This is the baptism that is always being generated by my presence here. When I call you to consider the teaching, I call you into my spiritual company, even if you are simply sitting down to read my books. Whenever you are in my company, whenever you give me your attention, then you are as good as sitting in the room with me where the baptism is being given. I do not stand in a river to perform the water ritual. I stand in the fire to perform the spirit ritual, which purifies, enlivens, and grants enlightenment. It is the perfect baptism. This conversion to spiritual communion is the essence and fundamental necessity upon which this way depends. Thus, it must constantly be emphasized. Without such conversion, without true hearing and seeing, without spiritual rebirth, the way cannot be practiced. It can be imitated, but it cannot be practiced. None of the disciplines are fruitful apart from such conversion. Those who are simply listening to the teaching, who have not entered into this conversion in the company of the spiritual master, may, as part of the natural discipline of listening, assume the various practical conditions associated with the practice of this way. But even so, they are not yet practicing the way. They are listening or giving their attention to the possibility of practice. When there is full conversion or hearing and seeing to the point of real practice, then real preparation for the ultimate form of the way begins, and not until then. Spiritual conversion is the most fundamental matter to be considered by beginners and the most fundamental event for listeners. When it occurs, it changes the entire quality of your existence. You become happiness itself, and you can never become unhappy or bound again. You may seem to become bound again, perhaps if you commit the ultimate sin, if you deny the spirit, become self-possessed in your mind, emotion, and body again. Bondage is always possible, short of perfect enlightenment. But once you are established in the principle of good God company, nothing in that principle can bind you again or cause you to become unhappy. Once you discover it, if you will simply abide in it, no, the page is stuck. So this is the fundamental import of your involvement with me in this way of life and this teaching. All of the gatherings of our community and all of the moments in which devotees attend to this teaching and to this practice are the moments of this baptism, the baptism of the Holy Spirit, as it is called in the Christian tradition, the reception of the living current that is the substance of existence, that is self-radiant transcendental being, love, bliss, happiness. To enter into that happiness is to be healed. All power is within it. All transformation is inherent to it, in it. To enter into communion with the living divine is to be transfigured, to be transformed, ultimately to be translated. To enter into the company of the Spirit baptizing adept is, in fact, to enter into the seventh stage of life. The process of the seventh stage of life, which are transfiguration, transformation, and translation, are inherent in the moment of God communion, and therefore this way begins in the seventh stage of life. But we acknowledge that there are habits or tendencies in every individual that must be purified, and therefore we also acknowledge that there are stages of maturity or stages of the development of practice. Yet even preparation for the way develops within the ambience of the seventh stage of life, or the living environment of the spiritual divine. Spiritual transmission is the reason for the occasions of celebration when I sit with everyone, whether they are in the room with me or sitting at a distance. It is the reason that I gather with people under all kinds of circumstances. It is the reason that I return to the mountain of attention periodically to see people there. It is the reason that I maintain constant communication of one kind or another with all devotees through the agencies of this institution. The import of my presence here is that I be a baptizer, an agent of transmission. Part of the import of my presence here is that I consider the argument of the way and consider the right culture of devotees and develop the practices in your company. But the ultimate import of my presence here is simply that I present, not merely to exist, but to baptize, to transmit the spirit awakening. Those who awaken in my company then know how to use me. They understand why I am here. Others who are still listening, who have not passed through this remarkable conversion or matter into energy or egoity into spirit living, appropriately maintain a relatively distant or formal relationship to me, although they give me their attention. And their granting of attention to me bears the fruit of conversion when they thoroughly intuit and feel that all that arises is spirit or energy. The spirit is not merely behind what arises, pervading it as some sort of invisible essence. The spirit is this, just this exactly, as it is all the other forms of appearance with which we might become associated. The living or spirit current pervades all of this, is all of this, and we may contact it intimately through the submission of our body-minds to it. We breathe the living current, we feel it, our fundamental emotion is one with it. The current is felt as an energy bodily. It is also felt as an emotion, the emotion of love, unqualified emotion, radiant living, radiant feeling. Be diverted from your thinking, your self-possessed process of mind, and grant attention to this living current. Then you will realize that the essence of that current is not only energy, not only love, but unconditional being or consciousness itself. There is a very practical means to living in communion with the Spirit being, or the divine. I have considered that practical means with you for many years. I have described 3 basic ways of practicing this communion: the way of insight, the way of faith, and the perfect practice. But all 3 of those ways and all the disciplines associated with them can be summarized as 2 basic practices. The practice that I call conductivity and the practice that I call the conscious process. Conductivity is the whole affair of physical and emotional and psychic feeling surrender into the living spirit of life current. We animate this form of our practice through all kinds of practical disciplines related to diet, daily living, spirituality, and services to others. We also animate it through the features of our meditation that involve the technical process of conductivity or breathing and feeling the living current. The spirit current with which you are baptized and to which you awaken in my company. That living current is breathed in a circle, descending in the front of the body and ascending in the spinal line of the body, between the crown and the feet, or crown and the bodily base of the perineum. It is felt from the heart in all directions. It is love or radiant emotion. We should be constantly relaxed from base to crown, or foot to crown, into this living current, breathing it in the circle and feeling it from the heart in all directions. Jesus' instruction to love God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength is to practice conductivity as a meditative process and as a process of daily disciplines and daily living, associated intimately with our feeling, breathing, living, physical personality. We are not merely to go inward to find the Spirit. We are the Spirit, and we must live in the Spirit, even bodily. The other most fundamental aspect and the primary form of our practice, for which our practice of conductivity of the Spirit prepares us, for which our conductivity of the Spirit gives us support, a basis in equanimity, is the conscious process. As the practice of conductivity liberates energy and attention in the Spirit, it liberates energy and attention from the contractions of egoity. We must devote that free energy and attention to the conscious process, radically intuiting or entering into state of identification with the transcendental being, that which is self-radiant and appearing in all forms and things, that which simply is. Thus, through the artful practice of conductivity and the conscious process, we remain in perpetual communion with the Spirit being, the living divine. If we do so, we mature inevitably and by stages to the point of perfect awakening, enlightenment, self-abiding, abiding in a state of identification with the transcendental being, and in heavenly and spontaneously recognizing all arising conditions in the body-mind and its environs or relations. There is nothing but the apparent unnecessary, non-binding, free modification of the spiritual radiance of the divine or transcendental self. The religion of the Spirit is fulfilled in divine enlightenment, in which all conditions are recognizable. By the power of self-abiding recognition, the tendency of attention to be associated with conditions is dissolved. At first, association with the grosser conditions continues. Then, as the tendency of those associations with the grosser conditions continues, then as the tendency of those associations is gradually released, a subtler disposition appears in this life or after this life, in other spiritual worlds, or again in this world. By our continuing in this disposition of self-abiding recognition, the tendency of attention to dissociate with conditional existence in any plane whatsoever is dissolved, so that ultimately the being is translated into the divine condition without the slightest noticing of conditional existence. We may say of translation that it is simply perfect identification with the divine self or radiant transcendental being, without qualification, whether it is also associated with the sublime domain beyond our imagining, beyond our conception in this world, is to be seen. But we enter into it through enlightenment, through recognition, through the dissolution of conditional associations, not by clinging to ideas of a place to which we want to go. I also teach, as Jesus taught, the radical religion of the Spirit. A religion about Jesus was created by some who knew him, by some who did not know him, by Christian-made priests, all of the contingencies of historical Christianity. That religion is just another version of conventional religion, the kind of religion that Jesus himself criticized. It is not the free religion of the Spirit, and it contains no esotericism. It has a myth-laden religion, a priest-laden religion, a religion of rules, enforced conduct, and beliefs. It is not, to any absolute degree, different in kind from the religion of Israel in the day of Jesus. Thus, like Jesus in his time, I live in a time of religions and must be criticized. I am a renegade outside the temple of time full of religions that must be criticized. I am a renegade outside the temple, preaching the radical teaching of the spiritual being. I also teach, as Jesus taught, the radical religion of the Spirit. A religion about Jesus was created by some who knew him, by some who did not know him, by Christian-made priests, by all of the contingencies of historical Christianity. That religion is just another version of conventional religion, the kind of religion that Jesus himself criticized. It is not the free religion of the Spirit, and it contains no esotericism within the life of the Spirit and the transcendence of conditional existence. It is a myth-laden religion, a priest-laden religion, a religion of rules, enforced conduct, and beliefs. It is not to any absolute degree different in kind from the religion of Israel in the day of Jesus. Thus, like Jesus in his time, I live in a time of religions that must be criticized. I am a renegade outside the religion, preaching the radical religion of the Spirit and teaching a practical way of entering into communion with the Spirit. Jesus likewise taught esoteric means of living in communion with the spiritual divine. But those means have been lost within the tradition. We know that Jesus spoke of spirit baptism. We know he spoke of conversion to the divine as a living spirit. We know we spoke of conversion from the flesh of the views of mortality, including religious views that correspond to that disposition. In spite of all, the mythology laid upon Jesus in the New Testament that comes through is still a spirit power, a spirit-born personality who was transfigured, transformed, magnified, made effective as a Siddha by virtue of God communion. Spiritual communion, all the rest of all the washed by the blood of Jesus mythology, all of the salvation through the death of Christ mythology. This has nothing whatever to do with the teaching of Jesus. It is a popular religion, a conventional religion, an alternative to true religion, which is spiritual and an essentially esoteric process of being God-born and ultimately translated into the divine condition. The story of Jesus reports a person transfigured and transformed by intimacy with the spiritual divine. It suggests also that he was translated. Most of the New Testament is discardable, the product of a tradition, a church, a very worldly institution I have criticized frequently. But the teaching of Jesus need not be criticized. It stands in the great tradition of the Siddhas. No transmission comes directly from Jesus now. The link with Jesus through baptized devotees has been broken. But many other adepts appeared before Jesus and after Jesus, and they too have come and gone. Some precincts may exist within the great tradition here and there, where the true spirituality is still alive. It is alive in my company. I am an individual of the same type as Jesus and other adepts who have taught and demonstrated the radical religion of the Spirit and who have baptized individuals in the Spirit. You are called first to the spiritual divine, and you must enter into this conversion physically, emotionally, psychically. You must become practically involved with every dimension of the being in spiritual community. Until you do, you are still a listener, and until you have fulfilled the process of perfect enlightenment, you are still preparing for the way in its fullest sense, even though you have entered into the stream and fire of the way in its fullest sense, even though you have entered into the stream and fire of the way, in some sense into the way of itself, through this communion with spirit baptism, this transfigured life in my company that begins when you have located my influence and become established in the living current of the spiritual divine. When you are established in the current, then you no longer view life with the mortal mind through contracted emotion and its harmonious physical vehicle. Rather, you see everything as energy. You treat everything as energy. You live as energy. You are a life bearer. You magnify the living spiritual being in all of your relations, and you are transformed by it. You accommodate it in every feature of your life. You initiate practical changes to make your life coincide with your spiritual disposition. You change all the factors of your practical living that do not coincide with the spiritual orientation of your living. You must do so to accommodate the spiritual divine in every feature of your existence, to be devoted to it wholly and entirely, not merely in the mind with a kind of subjective acknowledgement, but very practically, physically, emotionally, mentally, psychically, is the practice. Therefore, I do not call you merely to believe in God, but I baptize you in this spiritual force and call you to act differently, to submit to it physically, to submit, to feel it, breathe it, relax into it, animate it, manifest it through service and love in all relations. I call you to worship God in spirit, as spirit, worship God spiritually, through spiritual means, through living, through meditation, not through conventional prayer. I call you to realize that you are one with this spirit, not merely experiencing it, but identical to it, so that you may, by overcoming every fraction of the self-contraction, realize a state of perfect and uncaused identification with it, realize a perfect equation with the divine being and condition. This is the secret teaching. Baptism is the secret method. Recently, we published a book called The Secret Gospel by Morton Smith, about a fragment of a letter by Clement of Alexandria, who lived in the 2nd century. It contains a brief description of a secret process of initiation or baptism engaged by Jesus with his intimate circle, those who had passed through the initial process of listening, who had been converted and who had shown the evidence of a true response, who were eventually brought to either Jesus or one of his empowered disciples and baptized spiritually. The current of the spiritual reality was magnified to them so that it was tangibly felt psychically, emotionally, mentally, and physically. It is said that this process was conducted at night and that it was associated with a certain ritual of purification. The initiate came dressed in a white garment and was brought into a closed room for the initiation, which was spirit baptism or true Shaktipat, without certain of the peculiar philosophic and psychic limitations of the Hindu tradition. Shaktipat is popularly associated with the orientation of the 5th stage realization, which has been superimposed on the process that is true Shaktipat. Shaktipat is spirit baptism. It is the same process that occurs in my company, but to which you are freely orientated, without 5th stage limitations. In this way, you are called to enter into a process of perfect unification with the living spirit to the point of enlightenment, transcending all conditional realizations at the level of experience or presumed knowledge. Shaktipat is experientially associated with the awakening of the life current in the spinal line. Aspirants in the Hindu traditions of the 5th stage are thus devoted to a process of strategically raising the current to dissociate from existence in this world. Such an orientation, common to the conventions of Hinduism, is not really part of a tradition that acknowledges the divine spirit fully. It views the individual such as a spiritual being behind the body-mind and separable from it. It conceives that God as the being that pervades the world and is separate from it, ultimately to be located elsewhere. Thus, the conventional orientation of spirit baptism, or the Shaktipat of the traditions, is generally ego-based and dissociative. I call you to understand that the spirit is the substance of this world. The body-mind is one with that current. Therefore, you are not rightly devoted to attaching yourself to one aspect of this current in order strategically to dissociate from this world. You must enter into spirit communion utterly, breathe the spirit in its full circle, be sublimed in it, transfigured and transformed by it, transcend yourself in it, and then quite naturally, association with the limiting conditions represented by this world and other planes beyond this world will disappear. Otherwise, the strategy of egoic dissociation and attachment to the ascending quality of the living current will only produce temporary ego-based results. Spirit baptism, therefore, is a greater affair than is commonly understood in the yogic terms of Shaktipat, but it is a communication of the same spiritual force. It is also a communication of more than force or energy that we may feel over against ourselves. It is a communication of the reality, the transcendental being, which is radiant, manifesting as all beings and worlds, manifesting as the present body-mind, which is not merely in the body-mind, but is the substance of the body-mind. Therefore, I call you to acknowledge that you are in spirit presently, that you are in the domain of the spiritual divine presently. If you can awaken to this realization, then you will be happy presently, and you will not need to ascend to become happy. Ascent is natural at some stage and true to enlightenment in the seventh stage, but you need not go through the process of ascent to be happy or to be God realized. Da.